Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today is book review time and it's sci-fi book review time. So I don't do a lot of sci-fi on the channel because it is, as you can see from the books behind me, mostly fantasy. But today I'm going to take a look at Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. So Project Hail Mary is a sci-fi book that I've been looking to read for quite a while. I've had a lot of friends who've read it and have kind of raved about how good it is. And from the synopsis, it's something which I wanted to read anyway. It sounded quite interesting to me. I've not read any of Andy Weir's other novels, although I have seen the movie of The Martian and I really enjoyed it. I loved the kind of combination of science and the intense storyline and also the humour that made the main character really likeable for me, and I was looking here for something similar and I'm really pleased to say that's exactly what I got. So with this one, I'm really not going to go very far into the plot itself because I think that would give some real spoilers as to the actual storyline, especially with the way that this is set out, because you really do piece the storyline together as you go along with this one. As far as the overall synopsis goes though, and this is freely available on the back of the book and on review sites and so forth, we are following a character called Ryland Grace who finds himself on a last-ditch mission to essentially save humanity from an extinction-level threat. So the key part of the storyline that really makes this work well for me is that this isn't a kind of an Armageddon-style action hero save the world plot. We're dealing with a character here who is definitely not your typical action hero, and he wakes up from a coma with no recollection of who he is. He's got pretty much total amnesia. He doesn't know who he is, where he is, what he's doing. He literally doesn't even know his own name. And although that's not a new storytelling technique, I really appreciated it here because it gave us a real opportunity to learn who our character is and what he's doing and what set this story in motion as the character himself finds out these things. So the early part of the story is told through a combination of science as he's working out where he is and what's going on, and flashbacks as he starts to gradually regain his memory, which allows him to start piecing things together as he goes. The flashbacks do continue throughout the story up to the point where he's got total recollection and he knows exactly what has happened, what set him in motion on this particular path, and all of the associated feelings that go along with that. So what makes this different for me compared to other kind of amnesiac storylines that I've encountered in the past is just the little things that often get missed in this type of scenario. So I like, for instance, how the character is able to extrapolate from his thought processes that he is an American because of the unit of measurement that he thinks in, and also the type of person he is, what his job is essentially. He's able to work that out as well from the first little snippets of information that he recollects. And I like the way that that's done with added little bits of humour which really match my own sense of humour. So I love that we as readers get a gradual revelation of the story as he explores his situation and pieces things together with these little snippets of information and through these little flashbacks of memory that slowly give him some idea of what his actual mission is. So like with The Martian, the humour here is right up my street, and I like how I listen to this on audiobook and the way that the narrator kind of approaches some of the humour, the tone that he uses, really fits in with the way that I use humour as well. And this made the character of Ryland Grace quite relatable to me because I was able to connect with him on that kind of level. As well as bits of the storyline, the flashbacks naturally also introduce us to other characters, because in this particular situation our character Ryland Grace has woken up alone. He's the only person on the ship and there's no communication with Earth available, so the only way that we can see other characters is to either have another viewpoint, but this is a first person tale so that's not really possible, or the alternative is what we have here, which is seeing characters through flashbacks. Now overall I'm not a massive fan of the flashback kind of device of storytelling, but I think it worked really well here to give us those extra characters, because otherwise if it was just Ryland Grace on his own, I could see this story falling flat. But it's also the story itself that's revealed piece by piece through those flashbacks that makes them such a useful tool here. In terms of the overall characters then, I really like what was done here. As I say, the humour especially allows me to really like Ryland Grace, but I also like what we get from some of the other characters, especially with Rocky and with Strat, and the way that they both impact the story. As an engineer, Rocky is a really good foil for the scientist that is Ryland Grace, and I love the interaction that they have and the way that they're constantly kind of bouncing ideas off each other and working together to find, with very, very different backgrounds, to find a solution to a common problem. I loved that exploration. I thought it was really, really well done in this story. Strat is a very different person. She's not really a likable person. She's very much kind of an angry seeming diplomat. And I just thought it was amusing actually listening to her segments or seeing the pieces of storyline where she was involved. And she just doesn't care what anyone else thinks. She's just barreling through every single barrier that people put up in front of her. And the overall kind of reason behind it, why she's doing that, actually makes her seem more human despite everything that she does. So I really like how that works out and that she's not just some unlikable pen pusher. Now, the other main thing that I really liked about Project Hail Mary is the use of science. And although I'm not a scientist myself and most of it just went over my head, it didn't really matter because all of the science here was delivered in such an accessible way that you don't need to know what's being talked about. You can just follow along regardless. As I've said, I really like the early examples of science where Ryland Grace is trying to figure out exactly where he is and what's going on. That gave us a really good introduction to it and it just ramped up from there as the book went on. So despite not being a scientist myself, I didn't have a single problem with the use of science or the amount of science and the way that things were explained throughout this book. I thought it just added a really believable aspect to the storyline. And although this is a science fiction book, and there are some elements that to an everyday person I would guess are largely unbelievable, the way that things are given to us in the way that makes them easy to understand helps me to believe it regardless and really helps with that kind of suspension of disbelief. Overall, I had a really great time with this book. As I said, I listened to the audiobook and I've heard a few people saying that there are certain elements, or a particular element at least, that would maybe make the audiobook the preferred medium for consuming this story. For my take on that, I would imagine that the written story itself is very good as well, because obviously it is, after all, the same story, but I can understand the additional elements that you're able to have in an audiobook definitely make it a bit more approachable, a bit more accessible. Although in the grand scheme of things, these are not major parts of the story, so I wouldn't necessarily say that you would be missing anything if you're not listening to the audio, but for me, I definitely appreciated having the audio, and overall, with all the different character voices as well, I think the narrator did a really, really good job here. So although I've not got a massive back catalogue of science fiction under my belt, I have read a fair number in the last few years, including some really good ones, but I would say that Project Hail Mary is now my favourite of all of the sci-fi books that I've read, and very much deserving of a 5-star rating. So how does that 5 stars translate into my weighted rating scale? So for the enjoyment, because I had such a good time with this, I really, really liked listening to the story. It's definitely one of my favourite audiobooks out of those that I've listened to so far. I gave this one 19 out of 20. For the characters, I really appreciated what we got, both through our main point of view character and those others that he meets in flashbacks and stuff. And I thought it was all really well done. The characters who we actually spend a decent amount of time with, I really, really liked, especially as I said, Rocky and Strat. I thought they really added quite a lot to the story. So I gave this 17 out of 20. For the world building, this is different in a sci-fi novel because we're not talking about an imagined world as such. For me here, it's more about the science and the way that things are portrayed and the way that I was able to actually believe everything that was here, even though some of the elements, as I said, may in themselves be a bit unbelievable. So I gave this 18 out of 20 because I thought that Andy Weir did a really, really fantastic job here. For the plot, I also gave it 18 out of 20 because, as I said, I really enjoyed the actual storyline. If you take out all of the flashback sequences and just look at the storyline from A to Z as Ryland sees it at the end, I thought it was a really good tale. But those additional elements and a couple of little twists that came in there as Ryland Grace was remembering things piece by piece throughout the story, I thought did in this case add that additional element. I just managed to up my enjoyment of the plot itself. For the writing style, I really liked this. I loved the humour, as I say. The actual writing itself flowed really well, and I gave this 9 out of 10. The pacing was something else which I thought was absolutely brilliantly done. I thought the balance that we had here with the slightly slower scenes and the more fast-paced kind of frantic scenes was really, really well done. And I gave this 5 out of 5 because I thought overall the pacing was exceptional. For the discretionary category, I've given 1 out of 5 for the audio because I definitely enjoyed this, and if you do have the option, I would absolutely recommend listening rather than reading, although I'm sure you'd still have a good experience reading this instead of listening to it. So overall, that gives Project Hail Mary 87% in my weighted ratings, which is an absolutely fantastic score and really backs up what I said about this being my favourite sci-fi book that I've read so far. I really had a great time with this one, and I think it's deserving of such a high place in my Hall of Fame, sitting at equal 11th with some great titles around it. So I know there's been a lot of talk about Project Hail Mary, with it being the Goodreads Choice winner for 2021, and with loads of people reading it, loads of people talking about it on BookTube and on Discord and other social media platforms. If you haven't read it though, I definitely recommend this one. As I said, I had a really great time reading it, and I'd love to see the movie when that comes out as well, which is probably going to be another couple of years now, but that'll just give me a good amount of time to forget about some of the finer details of the story and enjoy them afresh when I do come to watching the movie. So let me know down in the comments if you've read this. What did you think about the book? Or if you haven't read it, are you looking forward to it? Are you going to be reading it at some point in your future? Do the usual liking and subscribing of this video if you've enjoyed what I've been saying today. As usual, all my social media links and support the channel links are in the description box below this video. Do check them out at your leisure and feel free to connect with me on the different social media platforms. Thanks very much for spending the time with me today. I'll hopefully see you in the next video as well, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.